Ms. Bosutho, thank you very much for this opportunity. So first question is, since the Velvet Revolution, World Bank has approved first budget support loan for Armenia. In your opinion, why this decision has been made?
So it means that this is part of the program that we had agreed with the government. We have had a long-standing relationship with Armenia, of course, but we recently just endorsed our new country partnership framework strategy, which spells out the directions of cooperation with Armenia. And a very important dimension of this cooperation and future engagements will be to strengthen the foundations of good governance.
Why 50 million and what goals does the loan pursue?
Our relationship, again, is based on agreements on certain directions of cooperation, and is also demand-driven in terms of particular engagements. Why 50 million? Because we agreed with the government that this was the amount that they needed for this particular operation, and that we were able to deploy towards this particular set of goals. And what goals? Again, this is a very important operation. It's a standalone operation, which is recognizing, rewarding, and also supporting the government, the good governance actions of the government in a number of areas.
For example?
For example, three key core dimensions of governance, what we call economic governance, fiscal governance, and public governance.
Could you please provide some more details on this loan?
So what do we mean by, in this particular context, what do we mean by economic governance? Economic governance, we mean a support to actions and programs that will help promote competition, that will simplify, streamline the regulatory processes. Oftentimes businesses have complained about the burden of regulations. And also promote trade, facilitate trade, trading across borders. This is for economic governance. And there are a number of actions that will support these three dimensions. The second one is about fiscal governance, tax administration, and also, very importantly, good public investment management. Armenia has low public investment management and has underperformed in public investment management. It has an added challenge, which is that it is fiscally constrained. So it is very important with this background of inability to increase significantly public investment, and the need to continue with fiscal consolidation and reining in the public debt. It is very important to increase the efficiency of public investment, and there are ways to do that. And so we will support these actions, in particular the development and the implementation of a public investment management framework.
Ms. Bosutho, as I said, this is the first time that World Bank has approved a loan for Armenian government after the Velvet Revolution. So can we say this is the assessment on Pashinyan's government actions taken during past year and a half period?
Yes, we can say that. In fact, one additional dimension that I wanted to mention is the third block, which is public sector governance, which will basically aim to support the government's effort to combat corruption, to establish a fair, transparent justice system, and also, very importantly, to increase the competence of civil service, merit-based, high professional civil service, accountable to the population. So to answer your questions, indeed, the way we develop these kinds of programs, the budget support programs, is actually a very serious undertaking. We look at areas which we consider to be very important for reforms, to foundations of important reforms, and we agree on a number of so-called prior actions, so things that the government has to do over a period of time. Only against successful implementation of these actions do we actually disburse this amount of money. So we've been in discussions for almost a year on a series of prior actions in the area of governance. And indeed, this particular operation rewards the good progress that's been achieved so far, and which is very tangible in a number of areas, as I mentioned, and I'm happy to elaborate again.
What reforms of Pashinyan government can you positively single out, and what reforms in your mind they are felt maybe?
There are a number of reforms which are underway. And there are already a number of important tangible results. They actually span the several areas of the economy and society. Of course, we all know about the better tax administration and increased tax collection, which has been quite impressive. We also know about the continued efforts in reining in the debt through consolidation and prudent management. That these efforts were started earlier, but they have been they've been further undertaken. So very important. We know, of course, about a number of intentions which are taking shape in the forthcoming 2020 budget. We see an increase towards expenditures in health and education. It's still very low, and the challenges are huge, but these are good. This is a good dynamics. There've also been increase in salaries of certain segments of the public servants and in civil service. And if we look at the number of sectors, we can pinpoint several tangible reforms. There have been reforms in the health sector. In the space of health, very importantly, there's been an expansion of health services covered by the state. Specifically, there's been a removal of co-payments for cancer treatment, expansion of services for children up to 18. Very importantly as well, there has been added coverage for complex care for strokes. And also very importantly, sanitary aviation programs have been rolled out which help evacuation of critical patients. So those are very important reforms. In the area of social services, there's an increase in the one-time universal grants, birth grants, which will be very important to stimulate fertility. There has been an increase in the childcare benefits to promote female labor force participation, which is very important. There has been a simplification of application for social benefits, very important as well. And also very welcome, an increase in the budget for social workers' home visits, which will allow them to cover their transportation costs and actually access beneficiaries. And maybe if you allow me, I'll give you a couple of other areas. Another important area is the area of education. In education, there are a number of reforms which are being undertaken at this stage, but one that I would like to underline is a very important effort to review the curriculum for schools, and in particular the STEM curriculum, STEM standing for science, technology, engineering and mathematics. This is very important because the world moves very fast, and the material that children are being taught needs to be modernized, zested up. They need to have appetite to learn, and of course all of these are very important things to equip them to develop the kind of skills that they need to meet the demand of the labor force. I just wanted to know that Armenia has continued to progress in our doing business ratings. More specifically, its score on the ease of doing business continues to increase, showing a positive dynamics and trend, and that is again based on a number of tangible achievements, which I'm happy to very briefly list for you. There are a number of things that are happening currently which are very important, and we are supporting also as part of the DPO to facilitate trading across borders, as I mentioned. For example, there used to be a systematic X-ray scanning of trucks passing the border from Georgia, and that has resulted in long delays, sometimes 24 hours. Now with the introduction of a different approach, which is switching more from control to trade facilitation and risk-based approach to inspections, we expect these long delays to be reduced significantly. So trading across border is being made easier, which will be very important to support imports and exports.
And what about the challenges for Armenian economy?
There are challenges, and a lot of the reforms that are ongoing and the ones that I also mentioned with some tangible outcomes already have to be deployed more fully, so it is still early to assess their impact. There are important challenges in the area of health and education. There are some very good actions that have been taken, and the government is working on designing universal health coverage, which will be very important because Armenia has one of the highest levels of what we call out-of-pocket expenditures for health. People pay out of pocket for their care, and this is a very difficult situation because a lot of vulnerable households who are on the edge can be tipped into poverty easily with a health shock. So it's very important to make sure that we develop further the health coverage in this area, and we are very keen to support the government on this. Another important area is education, and then the flip side is jobs. We did mention that there are some positive trends and that unemployment is decreasing. However, it's still high, and it's not only a question of creating jobs, it's also very much a question of creating good jobs. So that we don't perpetuate what we call the working poors. And these jobs will of course will be created by the private sector mostly, and the private sector is looking for a skilled labor force, and here is the link to education. I wanted to mention to you something that the World Bank developed recently called the Human Capital Index. We wanted to put in economic terms the opportunity loss of not learning for kids and having an education system that doesn't deliver strong learning outcomes. So we developed an index with the purpose of being able to answer to a very simple question. And the question is, how productive will a child born in any of the assessed countries in this study, how productive will that child be by the age of 18 against the current so-called endowments in health and education? And the answer for Armenia is 57%. So this means that, according to this methodology, a child born today in Armenia will only be 57% as productive as she or he could be against, let's say, the frontier kind of endowments in health and education, like the best performing countries have.
Ms. Bosutko, in your press release on this new law, there is a very interesting description on causes of Velvet Revolution. So World Bank writes that the Velvet Revolution was the result of bad governments and corruption in Armenia. So if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time that World Bank uses the word corruption and bad governments for Armenia, if I'm not mistaken. So was such assessment presented to former authorities of Armenia?
Absolutely. In fact, I want to be very clear on this, that the World Bank Group as a whole has a zero tolerance policy towards corruption, and good governance for us is at the very core of everything we promote and we believe in the sense that it is critical to economic growth. If you don't have good governance, if you have corruption, the environment is not conducive for productive competition. There is low entry of new firms. New firms are not incentivized to innovate, therefore they are not as productive, and they don't grow, and they don't produce jobs, and therefore there's no growth.
Like in former Armenia.
And indeed there were some issues, and also I just want to be very clear on another dimension of why governance is critical. It is critical also obviously for citizens, and in particular for the most vulnerable. Petty corruption and informal payments have been very difficult to manage and can drive people into poverty. So it is important for all dimensions of society, for growth and for equity. Now, this is something that we've always spoken about. We just recently developed a new country partnership framework, which is spelling out the key directions of our future cooperation from 2019 with Armenia, from 2019 to 2023. Again, this is a document that clearly outlines the directions of cooperation, and it is based on a prior exercise, which is an impartial analysis of economic opportunities and constraints for the economy, which was called our systematic country diagnostic, and governance and issues with poor governance were very clearly outlined in that report, which was developed in 2017.
My question is, this assessment, was it presented to former Armenian authorities, and what was the answer if you did it?
Yes, we had very candid discussions about this in the past.
Publicly or just behind the closed doors? So.
I would say both, because these reports that I'm mentioning actually are very much based on public consultations or wide consultations. So we really reached out to beneficiaries, to citizens, to people in general, to understand what they see as some of the key constraints, and then we reported these constraints and discussed them with the government. There are different ways of addressing these issues. The current administration came with a very strong mandate for change and to address heads-on governance and corruption issues. Therefore, we are very pleased to be able to support this. And as you mentioned, this is the first of many, hopefully, operations or programs that we will deploy to support the authorities. But there were also activities in the past that were meant to address these constraints. I just wanted to say that a very important tool towards addressing corruption or room for corruption is digitization. And this is something that we've always supported. And for example, the better scores on the global doing business ratings have also resulted from an increased digitization of services to businesses, but also services to citizens. The more you minimize the human factor interference, the more you reduce the room for discretionary decisions. And this is something that we have been promoting and have worked with the authorities for quite a while.
How can you assess current situation in Armenian economy?
So we feel that Armenia's economic situation has improved. The fundamentals are quite strong. Growth has been strong. Exports have picked up pace in recent months. Inflation is under control. Public debt has started to decline. The financial systems remain sound. International reserves have been assessed as adequate, and employment rates, even though still too high, have declined, as well as poverty rates, again still too high, but the trend has been towards a decline, which is a very welcome development. So having said that, we feel that Armenia, of course, there needs to be a lot more investments. So investments have yet to pick up. When you look at the composition of growth and the drivers of growth, it has been very much consumption-led. and it will be very important to make sure that investments are a greater contributor going forward. So we need more FDI, foreign direct investment, but also domestic investments, and those include public investment, government investments. Luckily, as we can see from the draft budget 2020, we'll see an increase in public investment, which will be very important to stimulate growth, to continue to boost growth, and to establish a lot of the infrastructure that is needed for the private sector to flourish.
Share with us your prediction on Armenian economy for this year and maybe for next year.
We are actually quite optimistic about Armenia's growth prospects over the medium term. We think that we have estimated, our baseline estimates, of course it can always be revised end year, but our baseline estimates are that the economy will continue to grow at a pace of above 5% per year. Here again, we feel that consumption will continue to be strong, fueled by also an increase in government expenditure, higher wages, and we also see that a lot of the export sectors, sectors that have export potential, will be able to actually unlock this export potential. We feel that Armenia has a number of sectors with strong promises, whether in ICT, in tourism. We've already seen some of it over the past year. Also agribusiness, but probably a number of others. And here, what will be important for those sectors, again, is to be able to rely on a number of new developments that will take place. For example, we will have Ryanair now, who's going to bring more people from Italy, from Germany, and more travel will take place, and more tourists will come. We have to have more places to show them. And so we at the World Bank are also going to support the authorities with a number of investment projects to build this infrastructure. Just wanted to say that if the pace of structural reforms that we have been supporting and that we are supporting, for example, through this operation continues heads on, we expect this to also translate into increased investments over time. So the prospects are quite robust, provided that implementation capacity that helps deliver on these good promises.
I just want to understand, when you are talking about 5% growth, you are talking about for this year and for next year, right?
I'm talking about medium-term prospects.
For example, for 5 years, 3 years. Yeah. For this year, next year, and 21, right?
Yes. For this year, in fact, our projection is that growth will be 5.5%. However, this actually, these numbers are revised, and by year end we may actually see a higher number. But for now, we have our baseline, or our prognosis is 5.5%.
Thank you very much for this interview, Ms. Belsutkha.
You're most welcome. It's a great pleasure.